Hello, and welcome to None of the Above. My name is Steve Nemerovski, and I'm your host. None of the Above is a political program. We talk about why the political system is dysfunctional and polarized, and on every show we try and talk about solutions and how we can unwind this dysfunction and polarization. Today I'm really excited because we have never really gotten into much on the Supreme Court. And I've always wanted that, and I've been chasing after Jeff Rosen for years. He's our guest today, so I feel like I really reeled in the big fish today. And we're going to have a great conversation. We're going to talk about two things in particular. A little bit about the Supreme Court, but before we get there, we're going to talk about the National Constitution Center that Jeff heads up. And we're going to talk about a constitutional crisis, at least in my mind. And no, not that one, whatever that one is for you. But we're going to talk about the fact that most of the people in the country don't even know how to spell the Constitution, let alone what the branches of government are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, this is just abhorrible. We talk about solutions on this show. One solution I always tell you is you've got to vote, okay? If you don't vote, this system is broken. And beyond that, you've got to understand how the system works, how it was founded, what we're here for, and why this is arguably still the greatest democracy on the face of the earth, and why we have to keep it being the greatest democracy on the face of the earth. So we have with us today Jeff Rosen. He's the president of the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, a great friend of the Constitution, and we're going to jump in right away, I guess. So Jeff, thanks for being here.
It's great to be here.
Chasing you for years.
I'm glad you did.
You've been so busy educating people on the Constitution, we couldn't get you here.
Well, it's very important work, as you said, and you're absolutely right. It is a constitutional crisis when people are not aware of the basics of government. And the stats you quoted are absolutely right. A third of Americans cannot name a single branch of government. Only a third can name all three. And Yasha Monk, who's out here at Aspen, has these new, really troubling statistics that young people, 43% of them, are willing to consider autocracy as an alternative to democracy. Older people are less so. So constitutional lack of knowledge is an urgent constitutional need. And the Constitution Center in Philadelphia was founded by Congress to educate and illuminate the Constitution on a nonpartisan basis. Imagine that in this incredibly polarized time that you're trying to educate people about. We bring together liberals and conservatives and everyone in between to discuss what they agree and disagree about this document that holds us together, the U.S. Constitution. Now, it's this beautiful museum of the Constitution in Philadelphia, and I want anyone who's in Philly to come and see us. It's right across from Independence Hall on Independence Mall, where the Constitution was drafted. We have the rarest original drafts of the Constitution written by James Wilson, original copies of the Bill of Rights. But it's also a national online education center, and we have debates across the country, and we have this incredible platform that I've got to plug because it's so exciting. It's called the Interactive Constitution. You can find it in the App Store under Interactive Constitution. It's gotten 17 million hits since it launched 2 years ago. And you can click on any amendment. Here, I've got to pull my hat trick and show it. Okay. Go to the Interactive Constitution, and you can click on a nice uncontroversial provision like the Second Amendment. And you can see the top liberal and conservative scholars in America, nominated by the Federalist Society and the American Constitution Society, the leading liberal and conservative lawyers groups, with 1,000 words about what they agree the Second Amendment means, and then separate 1,000-word statements about what they disagree. And then multiply that by all 80 clauses of the Constitution, and it's a veritable education in democracy, where I'm a constitutional law professor. I learn something every time I click on this provision. Everyone from Supreme Court justices to columnists to school kids are learning about it. The College Board is using it as the center of the new AP curriculum. And it's just a model for citizens about the fact that when you set aside your political views and focus on constitutional arguments, the areas of agreement and disagreement are much more deep and often surprising than you'd expect.
So let's back up. I normally do this at the end. You pulled your phone out, and we can't show the phone on the screen here.
I'm going to put the phone away now because we've got to talk.
Let's tell the viewers what you just walked through.
Yeah.
If they want to get involved in this interactive process, what buttons did you just push and how do they get there?
Okay, so go to the App Store and look for Interactive Constitution, and you'll see the app.
Go to the App Store.
Yep.
Interactive Constitution. Okay.
Download the app, and it's all right there. Or go to the web and constitutioncenter.org, and it's right on the homepage, and you'll see it there. And it's free, and it's online, and it's this stunning, necessary, urgently deep educational resource that will teach you from different perspectives about what the top scholars in America agree and disagree about every part of the Constitution.
All right. So let's back up a little, and then now we'll come to where you are.
Okay.
All right. We were driving the car, and I said, how'd you become the head of this thing? He said, kind of by accident, almost didn't even know it was out there. So get us to you running this organization.
Well, I had two of the best jobs in the world as a law professor at GW Law School and a legal journalist. And I did that for a long time. And the Constitution Center just called and so they said they were looking for a new head. And they took a flyer on me because I'd never run an organization before. And I started in 2013, and it just is the most meaningful and fulfilling thing I've done in my life because it's a form of teaching audiences of all backgrounds and ideologies and perspectives, from middle school kids to high school kids and college kids to adult learners, 8 to 80, 9 to 90. And it's a museum, it's an education center, it's a debate center, and it's incredibly important. And now that democracy is under siege in the US and around the world, we're seeing the tension between populism and constitutionalism, and all of a sudden the framers' warnings about the dangers of an uneducated citizenry and their belief. Jefferson said that a democracy cannot survive ignorant and free. This is not an abstraction anymore. Civic education is urgently important. So we're just getting a huge response for these efforts. It's now the 5th most highly visited museum website in the country, all because of this interactive constitution and the stats for it. And I think that it's going to be more necessary than ever, and we're just going to keep pushing it out.
Now, I knew we had a constitutional crisis because my wife and I used to watch the Jay Leno show.
Huh.
And he had a segment called Jaywalking. And he would go out on the street and he would ask people the simplest questions and they couldn't answer them.
Yeah.
So it was clear to me this was going on. How did you know we had a constitutional crisis?
Well, I guess I read the studies that I've been citing and was really shocked. And it's really alarming also how the numbers are at their lowest in 6 years, that the number of Americans who can name the 3 branches of government. So, and then, of course, the Constitution Center is nonpartisan, and the polarization that you're examining and the structural forces that have led to rule by online mobs rather than by thoughtful, slow deliberation over time preceded this presidency. But it's only exacerbating in America and around the world, and now a lot of people are paying attention to it, and that's why we're getting so much engagement.
So I've noticed from going on your website that you work on like 3-year strategic plans. And you're in the middle of a strategic plan now. You've got a 3-year goal. So walk us through this 3-year period of time and what is you trying to accomplish?
Well, the main goal is to educate Americans about the Constitution on every media platform. So this interactive Constitution I mentioned is incredibly exciting, but it's also text-based, and we need to get it to learners of all backgrounds. So the next phase of the strategic plan is to create videos and lessons plans that will bring it to learners of all backgrounds. Right now, the College Board is making it the new AP curriculum's centerpiece, and we're creating a First Amendment curriculum for advanced placement kids. But we need to get it to disadvantaged kids, to middle school kids, to kids of all backgrounds from around the country. So I'm thrilled that Justices Neil Gorsuch and Elena Kagan have agreed to make videos around the interactive Constitution that will help us bring the First Amendment provisions into the classroom, because they really support this nonpartisan project. And through that and through lesson plans and partnerships with public and private schools around the country, we're really going to push it out. Then we have this debate component, and I want visitors also, I'm just plugging our materials because I think they're so important. We have this really phenomenal weekly podcast called We the People, where I get to call up the top liberal and conservative scholar every week to discuss the constitutional issue of the week, from the latest Supreme Court decision on digital privacy to the Golden State Killer and genetic privacy in the Constitution. And that's also getting about 100,000 listeners a month. We want to push that out nationally. We have debates every week and in Philadelphia, which are all YouTubed and broadcast and archived. And we're also traveling around the country in partnership with groups like Intelligence Squared, who are out here in Aspen now.
Right, I know them.
And we need to get those debates in front of adult learners and all archive them on the interactive Constitution. And then we have to integrate all of this great digital product into the museum itself in Philadelphia. So when it's so exciting, this building is amazing, by the way. It's designed by I.M. Pei. It's got these incredible views of Independence Hall. But when these school kids come yearning for constitutional education, they've got to be able to interact with the best educational materials online and also have substantive classes learning about the Constitution from scholars and teachers. So that's the plan. It's a simple mission. It comes from Congress to increase awareness and understanding of the Constitution on a nonpartisan basis. And of course, the center of the strategic plan is we've got to fund it because it's a private nonprofit created by Congress, but not much government money. So we're looking for supporters from around the country to help us achieve our mission.
So if we have 1/3 of the population that doesn't know any of the branches of government and 1/3 that knows one branch or something else, it's almost as if where do you start? So are you focusing on younger students to try and catch them early? Old guys like me, is there an emphasis in terms of how you're trying to approach this?
I believe we have to reach learners of all ages. The founders thought that. They believed that, of course, early education is crucial, and in middle school, having a deep civics curriculum and understanding what the three branches are is necessary. Getting in further in high school and college. But it's a lifelong process, and Jefferson and Brandeis talked about citizens cultivating their faculties of reason so they could be governed by reason rather than passion. I am on a crusade to help learners of all ages separate their constitutional from their political views, listen respectfully to the arguments on all sides, understand there are good arguments on all sides of most contested constitutional questions, and then have the habit of having a civil dialogue as a result of it. And we're doing that with these different materials. It's an ambitious plan, but it's a necessary one, and that's what we're trying to do.
Now, I'm not a student of all your programs, but sometimes it's best when there's a competition. Have you created competitions, like a spelling bee, a constitution bee, or something where these kids want to jump in and win the competition, win the prize, so to speak? Things like that helping at all?
We do. We got a wonderful grant from the John Templeton Foundation, which made this interactive Constitution project possible, and it had essay contests about the Constitution with prizes of up to $100,000 for the school that came up with the best plan for teaching the Constitution.
$100,000?
It was a very significant and serious prize. It was real money, and it was inspiring to see the kids that won it. And but competitions are great, and I always on the podcast give either homework or calls for listeners to, for example, send in the constitutional book they found most necessary, to read a Supreme Court opinion, the majority and the dissent, and tell me which they found more convincing. And so here's a call to your great viewers to do that. And also recently to come up with the quotation from James Madison that best encapsulates why constitutional learning is important in a democracy. So that kind of interactivity is really crucial. And and also, now that we're doing all this great web stuff, I'd love to have a constitutional hackathon to really come up with the best web design for pushing this material out as well as possible.
Yeah, the competition. We're in a capitalistic, competitive society.
We are.
So what goals do you set? In other words, you have a 3-year plan, but do you have specific goals where at the end of the 3 years we want to be down to only 10% of the people don't know it? Or
Wow.
How do you know where you want to get to?
Well, we need to increase awareness and understanding of the Constitution, and we can measure that in a bunch of ways. With digital stats, we were blown away by that. We went from 0 to 17 million hits in 3 years was a staggering achievement. USA Today called it an internet sensation. So we want to increase those numbers. We can measure the number of classrooms that we're in. We can measure substantive knowledge. So 72% of kids who interacted with our material about federalism increased their knowledge of the relationship between the federal and state government. And we can measure before and after results there. We have visitation goals at the museum. And broadly, of course, we want to have more and more Americans be aware of how to separate their political from their constitutional views. So those are the kind of metrics that we're using.
Now, a lot of people these days complain about Trump from a style perspective. And I actually think that his style is getting more people to engage in government. It's almost as if he's awakening them, whether he's awakening them for the reasons he wants to awaken them or not. So have you seen a resurgence in people who want to understand government more coming out of the disruption of government right now?
Yes, again, talking in a completely nonpartisan way, I can say that since 2016, our web stats have gone through the roof, and also we can tell which amendments people are clicking on. So when the Foreign Emoluments Clause is in the news, that's the most Googled clause of the Interactive Constitution.
Okay.
There's also still a really deep desire for learning about the structural Constitution. Article 1, describing the powers of Congress, gets a lot of hits, as well as the ones you'd expect, like the Second Amendment and First Amendment. So just based on what's in the news and how engaged people are, you can definitely measure a hunger for constitutional education.
I know in our society right now, we always want fast results, fast, fast, fast. I'm not a fast result guy. And I actually enjoy the give and take now of people engaging in government, and for whatever reason, they're getting there. And hopefully that's going to play out on your end, and we're going to get a better result.
Absolutely, and fast results are exactly what the framers were afraid of. We like to quote the statement by Madison in the Federalist Papers: "In all large assemblies of any character compose, passion never fails to wrest the scepter from reason. Even if every Athenian had been Socrates, Athens would still have been a mob." The framers are afraid of fast votes by direct democracies meeting face to face. The Athenian prototypes of Twitter polls and Brexit votes are exactly what they're trying to avoid. So the whole system is designed to slow things down. Separation of powers, checks and balances, and the Electoral College, which never turned out the way they expected, a Senate which cooled the passions of the House, federalism, and above all, the extended size of the American Republic, which Madison thought would make it hard for factions or mobilized ideological interest groups to mobilize quickly. All this the framers thought would guarantee that majorities would rule, but would rule deliberately, slowly, and over time. And there's so many changes that have undermined their cooling mechanisms, including, most notably, the polarization that this show is designed to explore. When we live in red and blue filter bubbles and echo chambers and geographically self-segregate each other, we're now more polarized than at any time since the Civil War, according to measures, which you know well. And as a result, all of this Madisonian slow give and take over time is out the window, plus social media technologies that are making it so easy for people to express their passions quickly and to have the most ideological members of both parties dig in their heels and refuse to talk to each other. We have a great project which we're doing with the Atlantic magazine. We're going to have a special issue on this question of democracy in crisis that will examine the roots of the crisis of democracy and solutions, just as you are. But one of the main ones is how to slow down deliberation in an age of warp speed social media.
How do you do that?
Well, there are particular fixes that the platforms could use. For example, it turns out people share fake news more readily than real news because fake news appeals to passion. The people who studied the Brexit vote predicted the result because they saw that the Leave messages appealed to angry voters and the Remain messages were complicated and economic arguments. So Facebook could, if it chose, put higher up on the algorithm posts that people actually take the time to read. They can measure how long you've read something, and if you read it, then it could go up higher than if you just share it unthinkingly without reading it. But the most important way to slow things down is to inspire people to learn about the Constitution, to take the time. Look, it'll take a second to download the app, but you've got to read the Second Amendment majority statement and then the dissenting statements. I don't know, in 10 minutes you'll learn stuff about the Second Amendment you never learned before, but you have to take the time to do that, and that's what we got to inspire people to do.
I hadn't thought about this before. Do you have a version of the Constitution that is in the "Are you smarter than a fifth grader" kind of a thing? Where it's not easy to read the Constitution.
No, it's not.
If it was easy to read it, we probably wouldn't need a Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So it's not easy. Have you tried to take the amendments and rewrite them almost in some type of a different language? If we're writing the Constitution today, here's what the First Amendment would say, kind of thing?
You know, there are certain sacred texts, and for the National Constitution, the text of the Constitution is
sacred.
It sacred. You don't fiddle with that. But you can explain it, and you can create videos, and you can describe it and stuff like that, but I think I'm not going to try to improve on those words.
All right, well, you're a great ambassador for the Constitution Center. If only you were more enthusiastic. But I think my viewers picked up on the message here today.
Good.
I'm going to transition now because I've never had anyone to be on the show where we've been able to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court. Now, I don't see the Supreme Court as dysfunctional, and I hope we never get there. Because if we ever get to the point in time where people view the court as dysfunctional, we've got probably worse problems than we have right now.
Yeah.
But I think the process about the court has been very dysfunctional. Starting with, I don't know when you think it started. I don't know if it started with the Bork hearings or whenever it started in your mind, up until last year when McConnell, the head of the Senate, literally one man in the entire country was able to decide who was going to be on the Supreme Court. I don't think the framers of the Constitution ever wanted one person, other than the president perhaps, but not even then, to decide who's on the Supreme Court. So how do you see this dysfunction? Where do you think it came from, and how are we going to get out of it?
You know, this is, again, in a nonpartisan spirit. It is fair to say that it's harder to approve nominees than it has been in a very long time. And in fact, I think if President Trump were to get a vacancy and the Democrats held the Senate, they wouldn't fill it.
I don't think they would.
They wouldn't. So that's just descriptively, things have gotten much more polarized. And the cause of the dysfunction is polarization. So it's one symptom of this system-challenging polarization that you are describing in so many ways. In the modern era, the Bork era hearings started things, ramped up the interest groups on both sides, who mobilized with a whole industry devoted to the Supreme Court, and then both parties just kept becoming more and more intransigent, and here we are. It's wrong that the framers didn't anticipate any of this. In the election of 1800, which led to the creation of political parties, which they didn't anticipate, the outgoing Federalists reduced the size of the Supreme Court to deny the incoming Jeffersonians the ability to appoint justices. So things have been quite harsh before, but at least in the 20th century.
Roosevelt trying to make the court bigger.
Court, absolutely. Right. But there was a truce for a good part of the 20th century, and now there's not, and it is sure hard to get on the Supreme Court if you don't hold the Senate.
It's not even the Supreme Court. It's really beyond that. I don't know what the statistics were, but I read maybe up until 1980 something or 1990 something, in the whole history of the country, we'd only had one presidential appointment contested, or 10, or what, some de minimis number. And now we've had hundreds. And we have, how many judges do we have on hold right now in the U.S. Senate?
There are a lot. The Democrats held things up too. It's just been getting worse and worse with each year. This use of the filibuster rule to basically be a minority veto was not what it's intended to do.
Right.
And it's not promoting deliberation, and both parties have supported that kind of filibuster reform at a certain point. And of course, in the end, just by almost happenstance, it was the Democrats that blew up the filibuster for the Supreme Court. And now the result is where we're at. So this is a political problem, crisis, whatever you want to call it. Although not everyone sees it as a crisis. During the Garland nomination, Justice Ginsburg said, we're really overworked on the Supreme Court, we need another judge, and Justice Alito said, no, we got no problem, we can get along fine with 4. So it's a political crisis, and it's just one of many related to polarization.
Now, you mentioned the filibuster. What's your sense of that? Do you think we've gotten to a point in time where we need to take a hard look at some of these rules? Or maybe
the filibuster can work if it is designed to slow things down as part of what is wonkily called regular order in the House and Senate, to make a bill go through committee, to have to jump through a lot of hoops, rather than to ram it through on party line votes. So the fact that both the Affordable Care Act and the tax bill got no votes from the other party is a real Madisonian problem. That's not the way Congress is supposed to work. Right. So to the degree that the filibuster is now being used by the minority party as the last vestige of intransigence that they have left, is part of a broader problem in Senate and House rules that needs to be addressed. And you could imagine if the parties were stronger and regular order were restored, repealing or rolling back the filibuster so it's really reserved for urgent matters rather than just a general intransigence tool that could work.
So you were talking about the Constitution for quite a while, but it took you a while to get to one of my big bugaboos, which people know about. It's the checks and balances.
Yeah.
And I think we have checks, but we don't have balances anymore. And one of my concerns is that when government does an act at the legislative level or even the executive level, people are dumping things on the court. And one of my concerns we talked about before is nature abhors a vacuum, and we have presidents now who cannot tolerate Congress failing to act. And they're starting to write very aggressive executive orders. What's your take on this world of executive orders we're in now? I know you have a bit of a historical perspective you want to add here too. So.
I do, and it is not what the framers intended. So these numbers aren't going to be exactly right, but Washington issued something like 8 executive orders, the Thanksgiving Proclamation, and orders to
That was
give
probably
information.
Controversial.
No, that was fine. He got that one through.
Did Jefferson unwind that one?
No, that one was all right. Madison had something like 1. Lincoln had almost 50. That was the biggest one, but that was during the Civil War.
Okay.
The first president to start issuing a huge number of executive orders was Theodore Roosevelt, who issued almost 1,000. And he's the progressive who comes in and says the president is a steward of the people who should be able to act unilaterally. And he protected the environment and prosecuted the trust by executive order. Then came his appointed successor, William Howard Taft, who you know, because we were talking, I'm a big fan of, because I have a new biography of him called William Howard Taft.
Right, let's make a pitch. Well, name of the book is?
It's called William Howard Taft. It's
on Amazon?
On Amazon from the
Okay.
American
Is there an
President
app?
series. No app.
No app yet.
There
Okay.
could be.
American President series. Okay.
Yeah, it was a wonderful assignment, and I came to respect Taft as our most judicial president and presidential chief justice. He came in, a former judge who yearned to be on the Supreme Court, and after he lost the presidency, got there. He wanted to put Roosevelt's active executive orders on firm constitutional grounds. So he persuaded Congress to protect the environment and lower the tariff and pass a free trade agreement. And he protected more land in one term than Roosevelt did in nearly two, but all by working within the constitutional channels. Then Roosevelt runs against him, because he wants another term, and Taft believes that the election of 1912 is a crusade to defend the Constitution against two populist demagogues, Roosevelt and Wilson, who are saying the president should channel the people directly and are also defending the use of executive orders and defending the recall of judicial decisions by popular vote. Taft is roundly defeated, and after that, the use of executive orders just skyrockets. Wilson issues almost 2,000. FDR issues 3,000 executive orders. Then it went down. George W. Bush and Obama did about 300 each, and Trump is in that camp. So that's a long way of saying that the framers did not anticipate this. Presidents of both parties are, as you said, using executive orders because they feel that they can't persuade Congress to act. Obama and Trump feel, look, I'd rather do this through Congress, but if they're going to not play ball, then I'm going to do this on my own. But the result is, as both Obama and Trump learned with the Dreamers, that what one president does by executive order, the next can reverse by executive order. So it creates a great instability, a partisanship, a polarization, and in the end, the courts may decide that some of this stuff is not within the president's bailiwick, and it should be done by Congress.
Definitely no way to run the railroad.
No, it is not a way to run the railroad.
Right, well, I'm glad I reeled in the big fish today.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure.
Thanks
for what you're
being
doing to educate people about polarization.
As I said before, if only you were more enthusiastic about the Constitution.
Well, it's very exciting and it's urgently important, and the future of democracy depends on your viewers and all American citizens doing exactly what we're doing here today, educating ourselves about the Constitution and making sure we defend and protect it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we've been visiting with Jeffrey Rosen today, the head of the National Constitution Center. If you're anywhere near Philadelphia, you got to go there. It's an award-winning architectural building, but it's filled with some of the greatest words in the history of mankind. So you got to get there. And if you can't, now you know how to get the app. So there's no excuses anymore. You've got to get educated on the Constitution. We thank Jeffrey for being here. We always try to educate you. We try to offer solutions. There is a solution today, folks. Learn about the Constitution. Remember, if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. Thank you.